The slides and handouts are available on our website, or you can scan the QR code here on the screen. And so you can have the handouts and the slides to follow along for our learning. So we're going to jump into the 3 principles of universal design for learning now. Number 1, engagement. We want to provide multiple means of engagement. And engagement is really important because it helps us know why we want to learn. We don't really care what we're learning if we don't care about the why, right? Why do I need to know this? So the why is very important in order to make a space in the brain for learning. And the why is also connected to the engagement principle because it's the affective network of our brain. It's the emotional centers of our brain. And it's very important that we're emotionally regulated and ready to learn. Representation is the 2nd principle of UDL, and it is the what of learning. It's actually what I'm going to learn. It's the teaching and learning portion, and it is the recognition network of the brain. And this is the part of the brain that has a lot of the sensory and motor components to it. The 3rd UDL principle is action and expression. This is the how of learning. How am I going to apply what I know? How am I going to act on what I have learned? And this, a lot of it takes place in the prefrontal area, the frontal lobe. And this is our executive functioning. So it's a very important part of the brain as well. And I love the UDL learning because it involves all the different parts of the brain, which in order for us to learn effectively and really store things in our long-term memory, we actually need to use the whole brain. So it's a really wonderful method of teaching and learning. Now we're going to get into more specifics of the actual 3 principles of universal design for learning. We're going to provide multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression. So what does that actually mean? What is engagement? Engagement is about recruiting interest. It's about sustaining effort and persistence, and it's about self-regulation. And if you'll remember, it's that emotional center of the brain. It's the affective networks that we're engaging. So let's get a little deeper. So recruiting interest. If we don't know why we're learning, we don't care what we're learning. We really need to get people interested in what they're about to learn. So we might want to introduce the topic in novel ways, like sitting in your car and starting a video, for example. We can do lots of different things to engage interest. One thing I really love is letting someone that's artistic do a chalk drawing on the sidewalk or in the parking lot as people are coming into the church to set the theme and the tone for the day. Isn't that wonderful? And it also lets people use their gifts in the church. Another thing might be to do games. Also, maybe an intriguing question or involving the current culture, brainstorming. There's just so many different ways we can recruit people's interests and get them excited to learn. We also really want to get to know our learners and know their interests. We also want to establish relevance. Why is this important to me? We also want to be welcoming and flexible. And we want to have things like alternative seating and be sensory friendly. Another part of engagement is sustaining effort and persistence. We want the learning goal to be known and visible if at all possible. We want the schedule to be known and visible. We want a plan. People do much better if they know the plan for learning, to give them the agenda for what they're going to be learning. We also want opportunities for collaboration, and collaboration builds organic belonging so that people of all abilities can get to know one another and become involved in the church. Also, we went to varied levels of challenge, and this can be done in a lot of different ways by adapting what you're teaching, adapting the activity. Self-regulation is another very important part of engagement. We want a welcome and safe atmosphere, and we want to be sensory friendly. We want to provide emotional regulation. And like I said earlier, we want to remember, this is very important, if a person is dysregulated, they cannot learn. If their brain is in fight or flight, then their brain is not ready to learn. So emotional regulation and sensory regulation are extremely important in learning. We want to have people be relaxed but alert, so they're in that just right state for learning. So sometimes movement breaks or different humor or just different breaks in the learning can be really helpful to provide that relaxed and alert state. We also want to allow time for self-reflection and to prepare our heart spiritually, which I think churches do really well. The next area of UDL is representation, and this is the what of learning. This is where we get into the nuts and bolts of actually teaching and learning. And perception, language and symbols, and comprehension are all important parts of representation. Perception, digital materials, as we talked about the different barriers, we can see how important digital materials can be in learning. It allows people to be able to learn on their own and not have to raise their hand and ask a question and maybe create anxiety or embarrassment. But digital materials can provide lots of learning helps readily available for all kinds of different learning needs. We also can provide modeling and scaffolding. Just like a scaffold along the side of a building, when you're building a building, you need the scaffolding in order to construct it safely and to help that building go up. But once that building is strong and standing on its own, we can remove the scaffolding. And it's the same thing for learning. We want to provide helps to lessen frustration, but then we want to be able to remove those helps as a person is strong and learning on their own. This is a really fun way to think about learning. It's called the learning loop. It's the see it, say it, hear it, do it. And I want you to say that with me out loud, actually, because when you see it and say it and hear it and do it, it actually helps you to remember what you're learning. So do it with me. See it, say it, hear it, do it. See it, say it, hear it, do it. And if we involve all those different aspects in learning, it involves all the different parts of the brain in learning, and it really helps us to learn better. Which leads to multisensory learning. We talked about this a little bit already when we were talking about the barriers, but multisensory learning is an amazing way to present teaching material to all abilities so that everyone can learn better. And please don't think of this as only for children. This is for adults as well. So multisensory learning is amazing because it uses multiple pathways in the brain, which is wonderful because if there are errors in the way our brain is processing material or learning visually, auditorily, that our brain can actually help self-correct when we use multiple ways of input, multiple senses to input that same information. Our brain actually can self-correct and learn better. It allows the entire brain to be engaged for learning. We learn faster, we learn better, our learning goes into our long-term memory better, and we can also have better recall when we use multisensory learning. So I want to go quickly over some multisensory learning ideas, and I've included lots of ideas, and we won't go over all of them because most of them are self-explanatory, but I do want to just go over a few that I think are especially fun. So something that you can do is you can use musical instruments in your learning, and it doesn't have to be a kazoo, but I actually really like kazoos, and this is just a side note. Kazoos are wonderful because it stimulates our vagus nerve, which actually gives our system a little reboot. So if a person is having anxiety or getting sensory overload or right before a sensory meltdown, things like humming, which can include humming into a kazoo, can actually help calm our nervous system down and get us ready for learning. So how fun would it be to have a kazoo orchestra at church? Another thing might be considering vocal changes. You can also vary the pitch of your voice and go really high or talk really low. And now I've just grabbed your attention, didn't I? I can also whisper something that's very important because now I've piqued your interest. I can also talk in a funny accent or do something goofy like this because now you just perked up and you're paying attention, aren't you? I knew you would be. And there's nothing quite as dramatic as a dramatic pause. Don't underestimate the effect of a dramatic pause. And sound effects. No one has ever been sad to lose a game when you do something like this. Just have fun. People love it when you have fun and it helps them to learn better. There's also lots of other auditory input ideas on here like readers' theaters, which I really love to do scripture and readers' theaters. Another area that we want to think about for multisensory learning is visual input ideas. Where people sit can be very important in their visual learning. And some people really need to be sitting straight forward to be able to learn better visually. So sometimes we like to arrange our classrooms in creative ways, but this can actually hinder some people's learning. So we want to be sensitive to that. Some people actually hear better and see better if they're facing straight forward or closer to maybe the whiteboard or the chalkboard or the screen or the pulpit or the teacher. We want to be sensitive to those issues. There are lots of other different visual input ideas on this list. I love object lessons, science experiments, illusions can be really wonderful teaching tools and really have a long-lasting effect in memory. Movement ideas, movement breaks, and this is not just for kids. Everyone appreciates a movement break. We can do spontaneous acting in drama. Maybe we could act out a scripture verse, or we could have a sensory path. Someone could do a chalk sensory path or paint a sensory path on the sidewalk leading into church, or maybe in some of our hallways in church to give people something to do out in the hallway to prepare their brains for learning. Something like jumping on the fruits of the Spirit or spinning on the 10 Commandments. There's lots of fun ways you can build a sensory path, and I'm very happy to help consult with that if you need help with that. Another great movement idea is gestures and signing. Gestures and signing can be really great in helping us to learn scripture and remember it. You may think back to camp days or your childhood days when you learned a song with actions, and I bet you still remember that song. And often it's really helpful to put signs and gestures to scripture to help us to remember them better. And air writing. It can be really hard to remember some of our big church words like omnipotent, but if we write it in the air, we're able to visualize that in our mind's eye and we're able to put action to that. That's getting it into our brain. Jump to Learn is another great movement learning activity, and movement and learning is research-based. It's a wonderful way to help people learn. So Jump to Learn is just writing like a verse, the words of a verse, or maybe the fruits of the Spirit, the 10 Commandments, or the books of the Bible, whatever you're wanting to learn on craft foam or pieces of paper. Craft foam's a little sturdier, so I like to use it. And then you just scatter those on the floor, and then you jump to learn. So you jump to the different words in the right order to learn. It's a really fun way to learn. Another multisensory area is tactile or touch, and we can write with our finger in shaving cream or sand on the table. We can also do sensory bends, which are so fun. You could do themes like Easter or Noah's Ark or just any kind of theme and put those items into rice or beans or rocks and have a sensory bend. Another fun tactile sensory input idea is using Play-Doh or clay. I use this with all ages in teaching and everyone loves it. And there's so many ways you can incorporate Play-Doh or sculpting into your learning. For example, everybody sculpt what is an idol in your life. That's an example of a way you could use sculpting. Another area is taste. Who doesn't remember a great meal or a special treat? Taste is really connected to memory, and so it is very powerful for learning. Bringing in the bread and the wine. Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me." I think that's very significant that he used taste and food to help us remember something so important. Another thing might be the Passover meal. It's so wonderful to have an actual Passover meal and celebrate the Passover together, and people will really remember that. They remember hating the horseradish. That's something they won't forget. And the salt and the salt water, the salty tears, it just really helps it to stick into our memories when we use that different aspect of taste. Another one is smell. Smell is also very connected to our memory. And the Bible has so many different smells mentioned, all kinds of different oils and incense and perfume, vinegar, the roasted meat, all these different things that talk about smell in the Bible and how powerful that can be for us to remember. I want to talk a little bit more about some sensory Bible examples. Baptism, what a sensory experience, and it really helps us to remember that important time in our life. Also, different rocks and stones and altars of remembrance. These are all sensory rich examples of how God used something tangible to help us remember. The parables, a rainbow. God didn't have to put a rainbow in the sky to help us remember, but how wonderful to be able to see a rainbow and remember his promise of protection for us. And the temple design, I love to think about the temple design and how sensory rich it is. The smells, the colors, the different textures that were used, metals, fabrics, all the different ways that senses were combined in the design of the temple. Another area of representation is language and symbols. We want to have easy access to the vocabulary and definitions, and we can do that with a digital format. We want to be able to use icons, simple pictures, maps, illustrations, gestures, diagrams, charts. All these different manipulatives are great ways to help people to learn. Comprehension. We want to provide context and connection to prior knowledge. Just like when you're getting ready to file something and you have to find the right place in the filing cabinet, our brain works a lot the same way. We actually have to have context, something to connect it to, so the brain knows where to store away and file that information. So providing context can really help our long-term memory. Also, text-to-speech can help with comprehension. Magnification, large print, recording our teachings. We can have different options for note-taking, like highlighting our notes, or having notes provided with blanks to fill in, or someone to help fill in the notes for us. Drawing and illustrations on the notes. Another really wonderful tool for representation is these wonderful Bibles that are illustrated and have great pictures. This is an extra fun one. This has pop-ups that actually come to life when you turn the pages and bring the Bible to life. Tools like this can really engage learners and keep them learning. Another Bible that I really love is these action Bibles. Who wouldn't love a Bible that's comic strips? And this can be really helpful for people who have difficulty reading as well. And it also is extremely engaging and fun to read. And there's lots of different action Bibles available on the market. We can have a lot of fun with brainstorming, which can really help a lot with comprehension, being able to provide that context for learning. Pre and post tests. I remember a spiritual growth pre and post test I took that was so powerful in life. It showed me here is where I started and here is where I want to be, and these are the areas I can change to make it better. Another thing that is really powerful is what I know, what I want to know, and what I learned, and making a graphic of that and getting the whole group involved. And it's a wonderful way to provide social engagement, which also promotes belonging, which helps relieve anxiety, and promotes all these wonderful things to help with learning.